So growing up, I was always asked by my mom to wear traditional Chinese clothes to school on Chinese New Year Day. My mom would go to my school to talk about Chinese New Year. She even brought Chinese food to school parties. I wanted to object every single time, and I just wanted to be like a normal kid. And yet I realized that I was acting pretty stupid back then. So since the start of the pandemic, there have been over 11,000 reported hate crimes towards members of API descent. Many of these are based off of untrue stereotypes and prejudices, and many due to a lack of knowledge regarding the history of API in the US. Because of this, I think teaching our history in K-12 schools is vital. Now, please welcome our guest speaker for today, Edward Cheng, the chair-speakman of CCLI. See here.
Is Edward here? Is iPad 3 Edward? Sorry. Okay. If not, let's skip to the next section and introduce Brandon since he has an appointment to go to.
How do you want me to speak now?
Brian, could you introduce Brandon, please?
Okay, so wait, this is kind of messed up.
That's all right. Okay.
So up first is Brayden Cheng. Please welcome him.
Hi, I'm super glad to be joining all of you today. Iris, how much time approximately do I have? Just what we discussed earlier?
You have around 5 minutes, but there's discussion period later if you want to add anything.
Okay, so I'm super excited to be joining all of you. I'm Brayden Cheng. I am talking to you from 105 degrees here in LA County. So I am 3 hours behind. I met Iris at a summer camp in New York City this summer. That was riddled with all the fun experiences I'm sure she can tell you about. But I learned about the Acknowledge Our History organization. I think that the goal of the organization truly is very venerable. It's something that I personally also care about, to which I am dedicated in ensuring that our shared Asian American, and for me, Chinese and Taiwanese American histories are being preserved and shared with not only our own community, but with all of the communities that make up the fabric of our country. So I am asked today to go through some of my personal important Asian American leaders, Chinese American leaders specifically, and then also just talk about how that connects to the modern day. So there are a few people whom I would like to bring to your attention. The first, somebody that I've had the opportunity to research as I've been interning at the Chinese Historical Society of Southern California in the LA Chinatown, is Peter Suhu Sr., who is instrumental in creating the first ever Chinese-owned Chinatown in the United States. So for those of you who don't know, Los Angeles has, for nearly 150 years, had a distinct Chinatown community. That community has always been sort of in the downtown area. At one point, it was completely bulldozed except for one remaining building when the city wanted to build Union Station, which is our trademark train station. So then the Chinese had to move a bit farther north, where they built New Chinatown, which still exists today. The entire land plot between Hill Street and Broadway on east and west, and Bernard Street and College Street on north and south was completely Chinese owned, every parcel of land, meaning that Chinese Americans had the unique opportunity of building a community by themselves. And this also connects into somebody else that I want to talk about, who is Y.C. Hong, the first Chinese graduate of USC Law School, the second ever Chinese American admitted to the State Bar of California, the president of, at only 28 years old, of the Chinese American Citizens Alliance, actually, whose meeting I was just at, and specializing in immigration law, meaning that he was the one working to help Chinese already in the US to bring their family members over to the States. And just to move on to the more political or national aspect of things, somebody that really interests me is Hiram Fong of Hawaii, who is the first ever Chinese and Asian US Senator from the state of Hawaii after it became a state. So he is most notably known for eliminating ethnic barriers to immigration in the United States with racially restrictive immigration laws at the time. Interestingly, his parents had been working on sugar plantations when he was born. So he is, I think, one of this classic rags to riches or rags to power story in fighting for the equal rights of Asian and of Chinese Americans. And in the more modern day, Mayor Ed Lee of San Francisco is another example of an Asian American politician who has worked to further the cause of his own community. He was a devoted member of the Asian Law Caucus, which started as a ragtag organization and became very influential in San Francisco city politics, as what many would see as a culmination of growing Asian political clout in the Bay Area and San Francisco, which has one of the most vibrant Chinatowns with the best food in all of the country. And just to go into a few historic, underrepresented historical events, today, actually, the CACA held a proclamation for the Rock Springs Massacre. September 2nd, yesterday, was the 137th anniversary of one of the most brutal attacks against Chinese Americans in the history of the United States, where white miners brutally attacked Chinese co-workers in the then territory of Wyoming, killing 28 to 50 Chinese who were willing to work for more hours for less pay, which the whites felt were going against their own interests. And so they responded to that by killing dozens of people. And just a few years around there, the Chinese massacre in Los Angeles in 1871 was where 500 predominantly white attackers attacked the old LA Chinatown. They killed more than 10% of the Chinese population in LA at the time, so about 20 of only 170, considered by many historians as the largest mass lynching in US history. And this is also around the time of the Chinese Exclusion Act, which Iris and I learned about at the Museum of Chinese in America, notable because it is the only law ever in the history of the United States to restrict all members of one racial or ethnic group from entering the country. So it is something for which the United States government has apologized. It's something that fundamentally altered the course of Chinese migration, probably delayed it until the 1970s to 1990s. And the connection that I'm seeing between then and now is that the hate that we're seeing, has not come to an end, even as equal protection has been enshrined into the law. The reality is that hate continues with the anti-Asian sentiment over the course of the pandemic. We see that there is a sad but profound fear among Asian Americans of entering public spaces for fear that they are going to be attacked by virtue of being Asian. There is a lack of representation that continues to unfold in Hollywood, in the media, and in the government. And I think that all of this begs the question of what can we as student leaders do to make a difference? And organizations like Acknowledge Our History, are so important in this effort, because as cliche as it sounds, history is damned to repeat itself if we don't learn about it, if we don't know about how to correctly act against it. So to have students and children in school learn about these issues, no matter what background they're from, means that they are better equipped to deal with it. If they see something happen, means they know what's right and what's wrong, that instances of racism and discrimination are always unequivocally wrong. And I think another thing is to support Asian leaders in organizations. So just as one kind of minor example, when I decided to buy a hat from Andrew Yang, right? I think this is important because, I didn't agree with him on everything, but he was a trailblazer for the Asian American community, and that he showed the country, I'm an Asian guy and I too can run for president. So I think that's one of the important kind of, unity within the community, to be able to say that's somebody to whom we aspire, that's somebody that we're going to rally behind and support. And community organizations also play a large part in this. The Chinese American Citizens Alliance is a big one. I was just a guest at their meeting, like I mentioned, and they are a national organization. The Los Angeles Lodge has been around for 111 years, since 1911. So they are engaged in remembrance for historical occurrences like Rock Springs, like the Chinese massacre in LA. And so they are critical in making sure that the community knows that there is a Chinese fraternal organization that's willing to support the community. And also the final thing I think we can do in personal conversation with one another is to talk about this history. And I think once again, this is where an organization like AOH steps in, right? Because destigmatizing Asian history for whomever it is stigmatized, even if it makes people uncomfortable, is, in my opinion, one of the first steps in ensuring that people are educated and that they are given the tools to take action. So I think even those everyday conversations and talking about these uncomfortable topics goes a long way, and that it ensures that our stories as Asian Americans, as Chinese Americans, are heard by the greater community. And I'm going to call on all of you to do that in your daily lives, just to incorporate some of this language, some of this history into your conversations with other people. And yeah, I'm super happy to join all of you today. If you ever want to talk about this more, I'm going to throw my email in the chat. I'm sorry if that was fast. I had some things I wanted to get through, but at brandonhcheng8@gmail.com if you ever want to reach out. And yeah, I'm super glad that you guys are part of this organization that Iris is leading. It's very wonderful. Thank you, everybody.
Brandon, thank you for that amazing presentation. So since Edward is here, all right, so please welcome our guest speaker for today's panel, Edward Cheng, the chairperson of CCLI.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Edward Cheng. I'm the chairman of the Chinese of Long Island. And that my presentation is going to be my philosophy, my thinking, how I conduct myself as a Chinese American, and that there are certain things that guided me over the years. One is, they call it Serenity Prayer by Carl Paul Reinhold Niebuhr. He's the American Reformed theologian. And he said this: God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. And Professor Yu Dan, she's a professor at Beijing Normal University. She's the author of Confucius from the Heart. And that the noble person who's Chinese has to have in their 5 ways: faithfulness, being loyal, that's what it means, loyal, and loyal to your family. Forbearance, don't let other people do things that you would never do. A wisdom, and have the courage to stand up for your rights. And that's what many Asian Americans don't do that. But now more and more the generation are now standing up. You have to be able to push back whenever you face discrimination or bad behavior toward you. People trying to set in their lives, they experience subtle discrimination, either outright singly or violent abuse. As Chinese, you have to have the courage and be able to challenge the prejudice, be prepared to push back whenever you can. Also, you can provide education in seminars to people who are not Chinese and hopefully change their minds about us. I did both of those things. One time in my neighborhood, a church group closed down my street, and that they had signs up, they saying no parking. But that time, I was not happy about that because we didn't have enough warning. And I approached the church group and I said to them, you cannot close down the street. What they did was they came to my house and confronted my family and I, and they called us racist. That made me very angry about this whole situation. What I did was, over the years, I had a good relationship with the community people, the civic groups, and the officers there. They helped me to challenge the church group. I had the community board with me, and we had a meeting at the conference table. After I made my persuasive argument, the church group apologized for their behavior, and they stopped calling me a racist. So you have the courage and the wisdom to challenge things, and you have to be able to push back when you have to. Okay, that's not normal of Chinese people doing this. Okay, the second time was around was I belonged to a community board in Queens, and I was voting on an issue about a Jewish center. They want to have a kitchen in the basement. I voted down with many other members of the community board, and many of the people were Jewish people. A bunch of young Jewish boys made racial slurs at me at that meeting. And I was very angry about that. And I said, what are we supposed to do? Now, Confucius thinking is use courage and wisdom. I had allies at the neighborhood. They were my friends because I spent many years cultivating a relationship. So you have to cultivate a relationship before you have allies. You can't challenge these people by yourself. So eventually, we found the boys who made racial slurs at me at a community board meeting. And I confronted them, and they apologized to me. And at the next community board meeting, the leaders of the community board officially apologized to me for their children's behavior. So that's what we call pushback. And the third incident, when I was the chairman of the Chinese Long Island, one of our board members was elected to be on the Human Rights Commission. That's the only Chinese person in Nassau County the Human Rights Commission, and that the people of the commission did not want this Chinese woman on my board, Chinese Long Island, not to be on the Human Rights Commission. Well, I went down there, had a little talk with them. Eventually, due to my persuasion, knowing courage and wisdom, I was able to convince them to allow my director of Chinese Long Island to be on the Human Rights Commission. So you have to have the courage, the wisdom, and believe what you're going to do, and you just do it. You have to fight on the hill that you know you're going to win. If you're not going to win, don't bother trying it. That's the Chinese custom of being a noble person. You have to be able to have opportunity to have wisdom, courage, forbearance, faith, and being benevolent. Now, in terms of education, I did that to educate the community at large. And what I did was, I think I gave to Iris some pictures of what Chinese Long Island did back in June 13, 2019. We invited the community at large to come to Martin Park, located at New Hyde Park. And what we did was we educated the community at large that the Chinese Americans in World War II served in the United States Armed Forces. During that time, they had the Chinese exclusion law, which was enacted in 1882. And near the end of the war, they repealed the Chinese exclusion law. My father served, many people I know served in World War II who are Chinese Americans. And that they did very well, they distinguished themselves. And because of that, the American people start seeing the Chinese people differently, especially if they served in the armed forces. So that was what I did. The community at large was there. Politicians and the news media was at the get-together June 13, 2019. It was well received by many people. Different religious groups, political groups recognized the Chinese Americans did serve World War II. And after so many years, after 80 years, are the Chinese people still considered aliens? Are the African Americans in the United States, are they considered Africans or are they considered Americans? Are Europeans, are they considered Europeans or are they considered Americans? The Chinese people have to stop being singled out, targeted that we're aliens. We are American people. You have to stand up in your own way. That's what I did. In Jamaica State, that's where I live, in Queens, consists of about 1,400 homeowners. I was the only Chinese person they elected beyond the board of directors. And they said to me, they didn't know any about Chinese people socially. So I gave them various board directors meeting about the Chinese people. And they elected me to be the chairman of membership outreach to Jamaica State's homeowners. So what I did was I created International Night every year. We had people from the Chinese Long Island, the children, perform at my community. They did singing, they did dancing, they played musical instruments, and they were impressed about the Chinese people. So they had more respect of Chinese people because it showed that we are very cultured people and that we believe in the philosophy of Confucius. Although Confucius lived from 551 BCE to 479 BCE, he talked about being a noble person, not to be belligerent, not to be assertive. Chinese people more are reserved, but they have to pick and choose and push back when they have to. Our center, during the epidemic, we had relationship with the business community, and some business people gave Chinese Long Island over 80,000 K95 masks and lots of sanitizer. Our members distribute to 50 different municipalities and communities, and we were very appreciated by the community at large, by the Chinese Long Island. In terms of education, I want to talk about 1421 is a book. There's a book. Here's the book. It's a story about the Chinese people who did he call it discovered or sailed to America in 1421. He's an explorer. He's a Venetian explorer, Giovanni di Verrazzano. He was hired by Francis I, King of France, to explore North America. In 1524, he entered Narran Narragansett Bay off the Rhode Island. He stayed there for 13 days. And in his diaries, he wrote that he met people who are not Native Americans. The Native Americans are dark, they wear animal skin. He met people who are considered white, yellow. The Chinese people, especially the women, are very elegant and beautiful. They wore beautiful clothing. They wore clothing from the neck down to their ankles. Those are typical Chinese women clothing. And that they wore the makeup, they wore jewelry, and they have this posture of command and good mannerism. That's typical of Chinese people. They wore jewelry, and he spoke very well. As a well-mannered person, an educated person. Research people found on the coast of California, Sacramento River, traces of the treasure ships that China sailed to the United States. And they found in the Sacramento River traces of wood for shipbuilding. And they used Candelaria wood, which is located in southern part of China. That's when they built the treasure ships in China. They sell all over the world, including South America, North America, and Central America. And that Christopher Columbus, when he was off the coast of Cuba, he found Chinese people on the islands. They looked totally different. And many other explorers up and down South America, North America, they found traces of Chinese civilization there. If you know, in Mexico, they call it the Mayan civilization. The Chinese were well present there, showing all the artifacts, and they also showed Chinese calculators. Only thing I could think about with the Chinese calculators were the abacus. So China, either they say they sailed to the United States and to the United States or Americas, or they discovered the United States. So for young people reading this material about 1421, it's an eye opener. If half the story is true, then China was the earliest explorers of a civilized country to explore the United States, North America, South America, the Caribbean. And also they found, the European explorers found maps that were similar to the Chinese navigator maps. That's why the Europeans know that the world was not flat, it was round, based upon the Chinese cartographers who came to North America, South America, because of the maps that the Chinese cartographers did over the centuries. And that's my short presentation. And I guess the next point is open discussion between the young people and myself. Thank you for giving me the time to present myself.
Thank you, Edward, for sharing your experiences with us. If any of you guys would like to unmute to know anything more about what Edward has discussed, feel free to unmute yourself.
Edward, I was curious. You said that you worked with the Human Rights Commission, who was like elected the only Chinese American person on there. What kind of work do they do, and how have you been involved with it?
I don't know too much about the Human Rights Commission. Before you folks were born, that was back in 2000. If a person feels they're being discriminated, that person will come out to the Human Rights Commission and state their case. And when they do win, they get financial reward. I remember Mr. Wong. He was an old member of Chinese Long Island around year 2000 or so, and he was discriminated on his job. The Chinese Center Long Island, among other Chinese organizations, present themselves and state their case that Mr. David Wong should be reinstated back to his job in Nassau County. That's what the Human Rights Commission is supposed to do. We had one Chinese woman, I forgot her name. I think it was Irene Wu. That's before I came. And she was on the commission to advocate Mr. David Wong to reinstate his job that time. Nowadays, I understand the Human Rights Commission, they don't have that kind of authority. They mostly celebrate diversity, not to be discriminated because of diversity, because the legislature took away that power. The Human Rights Commission is more of a figurehead now, but at least we got a Chinese person on the Human Rights Commission, because I was there, present myself to the board commission. In my persuasive argument, I said that she should be reinstated. They want to get her up because of technicality. I said, nonsense because the legislature of Nassau County appointed her to be Human Rights Commission. They didn't want her in because the way I look at it, because she was Chinese. So I brought political figures who are friends of Chinese Long Island, and the Sinovision television station of New York, it came down to televise it. I guess due to that pressure, they relented and decided to let my director, Chinese Long Island, become the Human Rights Commissioner. And she did very well over there. They liked her very much. That's how he had to be assertive. It's not comfortable for Chinese people to do something like this because I was in front of different kinds of people. I'm the only Chinese person. And these people in the Human Rights Commission are very assertive people, not like Chinese people. They're very assertive. They want their way, and you have to have an argument with them. I did not argue them. I used persuasive discussion, not to clash with them. So don't argue them, use persuasion. I learned that when I took public speaking at the Chinese Center Long Island Toastmasters. So I use those skills, not to fight them, but use persuasive discussion that they cannot disagree with me. That's the Chinese way.
Yes, I agree with that. But I also think that part of the reason maybe some part of the Chinese American community will hesitate to speak out is partly for students. There's a lot of bullying or prejudice in schools because of race based on Long Island alone and based on the stories I've heard from some of my friends. But you can't, I don't know if the students can always confront the other students directly, and sometimes they may even hesitate to report it to the teachers. So based on your experience, what would you recommend the students to do to confront this kind of prejudice based on Asian American heritage?
Chinese people are always a minority in New York City, all right? I found out in my neighborhood is mostly Jewish. And I spend a lot of time cultivating with them. I became an important person in their organization. I did a lot of community service outside my professional life. I took time out, professional life, to cultivate these people. That's why I was able to win my discussions with a church that called me a racist. And people in the community who are community leaders, they're president, vice president, they're Caucasian. They supported me to confront the church. I had a couple of Black neighbors. So using allies, don't go into a fight without allies. So the Chinese kids in school better start befriending with other students. They help them with homework or do this, do that. Because when I was a kid, I was in a rough neighborhood, and I helped these kids do their homework, cheat a little bit on the test with them, and they became my friends. So they protected me when I was discriminated, when I was in junior high school. So I had friends who defended me, and people who were verbally attacking me. My friends who are minority people defended me. So you have to get allies. You can't be by yourself. You can't row the canoe by yourself. That's the only way to do it. And it works all the time. You should do that. Have the kids be allies to people who are non-Chinese. When things get rough, you have friends. You always have friends because they like you. And people don't like bullies. So friends back you up. That's my adult advice to the children. All right?
That's very well spoken. Thank you.
Don't be bashful. Ask me questions. I had a lot of lives, I had a lot of years behind me.
Right. I just don't want to take up too much time in case anyone else wants to ask something.
Mr. Brayden Zhao, I'm sure you have a lot of questions. I could tell in your head you have a lot of questions. You want to ask me something.
So you mentioned courage and wisdom in the beginning. How do you develop that?
What was the question? I can't hear you.
You talk a lot about like courage and wisdom in the beginning when confronting. How do you develop that?
I'm a little bit older than you. I'm a senior. Takes years of experience. You could tell what's right, what's wrong. Use your education. Use common sense. That's your wisdom. You get that through life experience. You're a young person. Every year, you develop that experience of life. You don't go to places that will hurt you. You go to places that will nourish you. They get your wisdom. Then one day, when you become an adult, people will go to you because Mr. Zhao, you are a wise person. In the Chinese Confucius saying under Yu Dan about Confucius, you have to be benevolent, you got to have courage, you have to have faith. Faith means loyal to your family and loyal to the mission. You have to be able to do forbearance. Don't do things that people don't want to do. You can't force them to do these things. And above all, wisdom. That's the Chinese Confucius philosophy. That's you become a more of a gentleman kind of person. People respect gentlemen and gentle ladies. It's hard for you to understand that, but you know, it works that way. Thank you for the question.
Thank you.
Hey, does anyone else have a question for Edward?
So I actually had a question. So I know something you mentioned before, you know, fight on a hill, you can win on. If you can't win, you know, don't bother fighting. But obviously in the real world setting, there might be some times where you might have to fight. Has there been a situation where you yourself you may not have known whether or not you could have won this, but that you still had to, you know.
What kind of fight are you talking about? Verbal fighting or physical fighting?
Well, I guess more of ideologies, or in terms of not necessarily a physical fight, but I guess in terms of if you're facing perhaps anything about racism or anything politically or anything else that, you know, just generally in life.
Well, in my life, corporate America, you have to know how to navigate at work. The Chinese people are under not respected that much because they're minority. If you are a person of color, you go to NAACP. As a Chinese person, I had no place to go to. At one time at work, the supervisor, I have to say he's a racist, but he prevented me from doing my work. I was a financial planner, financial advisor, and I complained to the director that he is preventing me from working to able to get my client, the financial planning, retirement planning, estate planning. The president was ignorant of the tax laws of financial planning. I told that to the director, and the director spoke to the supervisor and told him to apologize to me. So that's the way to do it in corporate America. You have to have wisdom, courage, and when to know to pick a fight and to win. Because I had to win because I have my clients who are not even Chinese, they're Caucasians. They're professional people. The supervisor didn't like me because I'm Chinese. He made fun of me at the office. I kept my powder dry. I said, I'll get back to you one day. And then he had to apologize. Not only that, he was a racist to Hispanic people, and eventually he got fired. That's the way I could do it because I don't have the Chinese organization to protect me that time. A long time ago, we didn't have strong Chinese organizations to fight for our rights at the job or at home. That's a long time ago. Things are much different now. You have a lot of, I guess, Chinese attorneys who are human rights people. They'll stick up for you. But at my time, never happened. I had to do it myself. Good question.
Well, I also have a follow-up question to that. So I think you kind of also hit on this follow-up question. So, you know, everyone here is familiar with the term model minority myth, right? And one of the damaging effects of that is that the stereotype that Asians are hard workers, but not good leaders, right? So that means they dump a lot of work on us, but we'll never get the promotion because of that harmful stereotype. I think you've kind of hit on your own experiences with that being lived out. Were there other instances, and how did you manage to deal with that? And the reason I asked that is, unfortunately, I'm pretty sure that many of the young students that are in the Zoom call today will one day experience something very similar. So, you know, maybe some advice that you could give them to help them if they ever encounter something like that.
Okay. I'm a proponent of public speaking. The Chinese in Long Island started Young Public Speaker Workshop, 2017. We started with 4 children. Before the pandemic, January 2020, we had 24 students who joined the public speaking classes. You could see them the first day of the 8th session. They didn't speak much. It's a disposition of Chinese people, especially the children. The 8th session, they can't stop talking. They made a presentation. And I would recommend that these children here sign up and join Chinese on Long Island Young Public Speakers Workshop. The gift that you give to your children is have them become educated people and also have the command of verbal language. You need that socially, you need that at work. Because I talked to one father in Young Public Speaking Workshop, he's a manager. He said to me, in his office, there were several Chinese men there and they didn't speak up, but he spoke up. Every time he spoke up, he got promoted and became a manager. The other Chinese people just put their head to the computer and stay in their cubicles because they're uncomfortable to assert themselves in the American society. Chinese people are more reserved. That's their training. That's the thing about Confucius says. You have to be wisdom, forbearance, don't be a show-off. But in the American society, you have to assert yourself whenever you can. If not, they'll just bury you. I had the same experience at work. They hired me as a controller of a corporation. It was a very Jewish company. And I found out my job was to clean house in there. And that there were some incompetent people in the finance department that I want to get rid of. But there was opposition in management because these are their favorite people who are incompetent. But I proved to them that these people are incompetent, they're going to hurt the company in the financial area because I was a controller CPA. Eventually, they will let go because I was very persuasive. I didn't back out. You have to, in this society of Chinese people, you want to say something, you have to push back. But make sure you have information that will defend yourself. One person was a management consultant in computers. I had to put him down because he's messing up the system in accounting. And I had the director of the company get him fired too. You have to assert yourself. Because you don't assert yourself, you're just hiding behind the desk. I was hired with a Jewish company. I was the only Chinese guy he hired. He made me clean house. I found out, he said to me, if you don't do this job, Edward, I have to fire you. So I had to take on internal politics and external politics. It took a toll on me, but it's okay. Because I felt that my back was strong and straight. And that's why I didn't have the Chinese movement that time. Now they have the Chinese movement. Now, at that time, I had to do it myself. So it makes us stronger, you know? And then you feel proud, you look yourself in the mirror and say, I did a good job. I'm proud of what I did. And there was opposition. I used wisdom, judgment, forbearance, and when to strike. You don't lash out right away. That shows you lost your control of the situation. When you're a young person, as a student, it's the same thing. I was confronted when I was a kid, but I used allies. Use the Chinese mentality to overcome opposition. And sometimes I was approached to be violently, physically attacked, but I had a certain posture and they backed down. Adults wanted to assault me. That was the scary part of my life as an adult. I was surrounded by people of color. They had a knife in front of me. But I had a posture of no fear, calmness. And the people were afraid that Chinese people all know Kung Fu.
Right.
So I faced them down without fear. And then they just packed their knife and walked away.
Thanks for sharing, Edward. I'm so sorry that I have to cut you short, but we do have other speakers that we have to get through. So thank you for joining us today. And if we have more time at the discussion period, I'm sure that some of the other students would like to add some more questions as well.
So we're over now or what?
Oh, the meeting's not over, but since Brandon didn't get a chance to answer some questions that the other kids may have,
Sure.
let's
That's this evening? I'll be there, discussion time, or it's over for me now?
yes, sure. You can ask any questions. You can comment anything.
Okay,
A part of the seminar.
okay.
Okay, so actually, I had a question for Brandon. So
Yeah.
I didn't get to ask you this during summer academy. What kind of got you started on writing and interested in Asian American activism?
What got me started? Well, that's a loaded question. I can't necessarily say that there was one and only one catalyst. I think that it was, in many ways, for me at least, it was an amalgamation of different experiences. I think one of those experiences was a racist encounter that I personally had at my local park. During I think it was May of 2020, so the third month of COVID, and I was just I was walking around the park, and then everybody had been wearing the mask, but I took my mask off to drink some water, and this white guy walks next to me and he says, "Oh, all these Asians are spreading COVID." And it was just, I was deflated. I was 12. I didn't know how to respond. And it was in the middle of the community that I had grown up in for, 10 years, right? Since I was 2 or 3. So it was just my revelation, or the revelation being made clear to me that and I hate to put it this way because it sounds so cynical, but that hate is everywhere, right? That there are people who are going to come after you everywhere, and that it is also in some ways, I mean, obviously you're not responsible for their behavior. I would never say that somebody who is a victim is responsible for the victim, for the behavior of the aggressor. That's not fair at all. But that, as Asian Americans, that we are only strong when we are together, right? That we rise up together, that we counter the forces of other people's intolerance, of other people's bigotry together, right? And then some other experiences that I had was just, I think, the slights of people, there was this kid that I had never met in my art class who was talking about how he was going to make an Asian sculpture, and then he used his fingers to show us how small he would make the eyes. So that was another experience where I said, these people, they are so ignorant about the community as a whole. All the stereotypes, I think, that Edward mentioned about, and that Richard mentioned about the model minority, about the whole thing about, Asians are good at math, and they're bad at being leaders, and they're bad at advocating for themselves, they're bad at being politically involved. So it was a confluence of these factors of my being continually told in the media and people around me, and even people that I didn't know, giving me the perception that I was not capable, and that people of my community were not capable to affect change in our daily lives for what we believed in. And that was something that did not sit right with me, right? So then I found out more ways to get involved in my own community. I, for a while, had been interning at the Chinese Historical Society of Southern California. And like I mentioned, I had just been at the meeting, the Zoom meeting of the Chinese American Citizens Alliance, where I was invited as a guest. And so I think that it is those experiences that made me want to get involved in local Chinese organizations, where I would be able to not only learn more, but to be able to be empowered with the tools to help other people learn more, and to help other people become more aware. So I think in many ways it was the negative experiences that spurred me to act, that gave me that personal catalyst of, no more, right? I'm not going to stand for anymore. I'm going to at least try to do my part. So yeah, that was a long-winded answer, but just a combination of all of that.
Yeah, it sounds amazing. Yeah, I definitely agree. Even though those experiences are very negative, it's kind of like a wake-up call, and it's really what gets activists to change our reality that's flawed, right? Okay, does anyone else have any questions? All right, if not, Brian?
Oh yeah, I have a question.
Yeah.
So what spurred your interest in just studying this deep understanding of history, not just
Okay.
getting to the top all the way through?
Yeah. So I think even removing the Chinese aspect of it, that I've always kind of been a big history guy. let's see. So, okay. So I think actually interest in history writ large is probably due to the result of traveling. I was only 8 when I visited London for the first time, and I can't say that I understood everything, but I was able to visit, what is still to this day one of my favorite museums. My top 2 favorite museums in the world, or top 3, are actually the Met in New York, the British Museum in London, and the National Palace Gallery in Taipei. And so I visited the British Museum, and I only understood, because we were on a tour, certain parts of things or words that I didn't understand, concepts, ideas, the historical connections between, at that time, what was unfamiliar to me, the slave trade, the looting of artifacts, all of these things that ended up creating one of the most beautiful art galleries in the world, right? So it was then, and then going to just around London, and then at that visit, we went to Buckingham Palace, to Kensington Palace, all of these historical landmarks that made me want to know more. So then I had kind of this 1-month-long obsession with the royal family. So I would go up, and then it was so interesting to me, the lineage, the genealogy, the history, how there was one king that abdicated to marry Wallis Simpson, a twice divorced American actress. So it was just these tangential things that were interesting and funny to me, and that I had never heard of before. And I have fortunately had the opportunity to visit many more places since then. I had an Asia trip in 2018 where I visited both sides of the Taiwan Strait. I went to Taiwan, to the mainland, and to Hong Kong. And that trip, I had become engrossed, I think, even at a more rudimentary level, to the issue between China and Taiwan, something that I'm very interested in today as well. So that was another deep dive into the history, talking to people, talking to my own grandparents, family members on both sides, right? So it's those interests that I'm now back in LA. I'm not in those places anymore, but it is the memory of that. It is what, just the interest that that was originally created in me, but also I think my wanting to know more, saying, I've seen this much here, but how do I go about it myself to find out more information? So I think it is just the continuous curiosity that builds on itself that really made me want to learn more. There's something in the chat. How old am I? How young am I? Well, I would like to say that I'm 15 years young. I just began my sophomore year. So thank you. Yes. I feel like I'm at the point where, thinking about getting old, right?
I don't think you're quite old yet, Brandon.
Yes, I have a long way to go. Long way to go.
Right. Okay. So thank you, Brandon. Thank you, everyone, for answering all of our questions. Next up, I will move the spotlight back to Brian.
Hi. Yeah, I will be the next student representative. I want to take this time to share with you my experience in AAPI activism and how we as student leaders can make a difference. So when I was 7, someone on my school bus started pulling their eyes so they became thinner, saying that the first word was Korean, second was Japanese, and the third was Chinese. 3 years later, at the height of the pandemic, I was sitting in my backyard when a man spat at me. I found myself surrounded by racial discrimination, stereotypes, and hate. And this really sparked my advocacy journey. Next slide. So when I was 10 years old, I watched a series of PBS documentaries called Asian Americans, which caused me to discover an eye-opening part of history that schools didn't teach. And this reckoning led me to write my essay, Don't Forget Your Roots, which talked about the aforementioned documentary series, its influence on me, and how AAPI curriculum should be taught in schools. My essay was selected to be read at an AAUC Solidarity webinar featuring the documentary producer, filmmaker, and advocate Renee Tajima Pena, who won Peabody for the docuseries. While I didn't realize it at the time, this served as a building block for future endeavors. Next slide.
Sorry, give me one moment.
Okay, in late 2021, I learned through Make Us Visible New Jersey that AAPI curriculum bills had a chance of being entered into the NJ legislation system. And I saw this as a golden opportunity and responsibility to participate and be part of this monumental change for our schools. I started small by making phone calls to Senator President Sweeney and Assembly Education Committee Chair Lampett. Doing small acts like these are a great way to prepare for large challenges. Following this, I submitted a written testimony and even went to the State House to give my oral testimony on December 16th. I sat in front of the Senate Education Committee with Seema Kumar, an Indian American high school teacher, and Sadaf Jaffer, newly elected NJ Assembly member, the first Muslim woman to serve as a mayor in the US. When it was all said and done, the committee unanimously voted to pass NJ Bill S3764. While the bill's passing had made headlines, most still did not know much about it, so the more voices we had, the more the state would have to pay attention. To continue spreading the word, I published an op-ed in the community newspaper about my experience testifying and why this cause was important. This past June, I was invited to be a panelist at the annual United Chinese Americans Conference. It was really amazing and inspiring to see the amount of motivated and driven people at the conference who wanted to make change. Next slide. If you want to get involved with API advocacy, here are a few things you can start with. So youth voices hold the most strength, so publishing articles, hosting events is vastly important. Another important way is to raise awareness at school. After all, the goal of passing these API curriculum bills this year was to have them implemented. Inspiring other youth voices and talking to teachers about how the API curriculum can be taught in their respective subjects is critical. Another important part of advocacy is the use of media in different formats, such as musicals and short films. A great example is the musical Illegal, which I watched a week ago. Not only did it have great music, it also delivered a firm and relatable story regarding Chinese immigrants in Andrew Island. This was all made possible by another youth advocate who's here right now, Ethan Song, who raised over $13,000 to bring this performance to his hometown. I hope my talk was able to create a positive impact on you. There are a lot of API advocates already, and I hope you'll become one too. There are many organizations you can contact, with examples being Make Us Visible New Jersey and API Youth Rising. And together we can create a greater future.
Okay, great. Thanks, Brian, for sharing. And now, if anyone has any questions for Brian, they can chime in. Brendan.
Well, that's very impressive to hear about the movement that you conducted. So I'm just curious about, what, like, had you been, had you felt that you hadn't been learning any Asian history at school? Like, to what extent had there even been any Asian/Chinese history in the curriculum, if at all, is what I'm curious about.
So the only real mark of Chinese history I remember learning in elementary school was some random stuff about the Han Dynasty, which they sent a quick unit on. So when I watched the PBS docuseries, there was just a huge bomb of new information coming flying at me, and I was just so surprised by it because I had never knew any of this before. So eventually, as I kept watching episode through episode, it kind of just dawned on me that, oh, this isn't taught at my school. Oh, this is brand new. I'm not just not processing the information. It's just not taught at public schools.
I feel the same way. I think API education is introduced way too late and way too little. For all that is worth, there's nothing about South Asians. There's, internment camps and exclusion acts and railroad workers, but a lot of things aren't being highlighted. Like all of the things that Brendan listed off at the beginning of the meeting, I didn't hear anything about it in school. And I also, if it's okay, this isn't a direct question towards Brian, but I wanted to ask Ethan, since you were in his presentation, do you want to share a little bit about your experience with Illegal?
Sure. I mean, oh, sorry, I can't turn on my camera, by the way. My monitor does not have one, but I really just got involved in a very similar way. I also went to a public school in New York City, and it is not until I went to a private boarding school for high school that I realized there was so much history about Chinese Americans in America. The extent to which I learned in middle school was, I think, we learned about the railway workers, and that's pretty much it. I did not know about the detainment of Asian Americans in Angel Island. I did not learn anything about that. So this is something that I wanted to bring to more people. I think that this is a very dark chapter in American history. And like Brandon did say before, those who do not remember history are condemned to repeat it. So that's one of my primary motivations for bringing this play to Queens, New York.
What's the name of the play again, Ethan?
It's Illegal, a New Musical by Skylar Chin.
Thank you. I'm gonna take a look. Found it.
Yeah, thanks, Ethan, for sharing your experience with the musical. I want to ask another question to Brian, if it's okay. What was your experience like working with the senators and speaking in front of, all the important politicians? I know that you're very young, so it's very impressive that you're already such a good public speaker. But do you have any previous experience, and how did you feel?
So it was when I first found out that there was this opportunity, it just felt so daunting and I kind of wanted to edge away from it. But I realized that the cost was completely worth, just doing it, even if I messed up or failed somehow, it was worth going for. So I signed up and I wrote my testimony, and the day came by just so quickly. And just waiting in the state house, I feel like the butterflies in my stomach weren't really nervous. They were just more excited. Like this was like almost like a dream. And so actually speaking there, it was a snap of the fingers and it was just done. And honestly, I'd do it 100 times over.
It's great to hear your enthusiasm. And I wanted to ask if anyone else has any questions for Brian.
Bye.
Edward, sorry.
Okay, just a quick question. Brian, who motivated you to do this? Any adults or just the fire in your belly?
I feel like, my parents' views have definitely helped, but I think the main push was just facing that, like, the tiny eyes and the being spat at. It's not right. And that's like what really pushes you to do things.
I guess that's the motivation, right, Brian?
Yeah, that's definitely the main motivation.
You're so grown up for being a child. Congratulations. It's a good start. I commend you. I look forward to hearing about you as you grow up. Keep up the good work, Brian.
And after the meeting, if anyone would like me to share your contact information with everyone else at the meeting, you can just shoot me a text or shoot me an email. I'm sure that in the future, everyone wants to keep in touch because we're all working.
Yes, that'd be great. Yeah, feel free to share my contact info.
Yeah.
I want to make one pitch.
Yes.
Okay, we talked about how to have young people learn how to be assertive and yet be polite.
Right.
Chinese Long Island is opening up their next program for Young Public Speakers Workshop starting Saturday at 12:30. Should come to our center September 10th. Check us out. The first session, you can just hear and listen. If they want to stay, then you can stay for the next 7 sessions. I encourage the young people to go to Young Public Speaker Workshop. You know Fern Rashcover, so you know the drill. So I recommend these children, especially Brayden Zhao, to get Fern Rashcover, help him hone his speaking skills.
Yeah, so is it online or is it in person?
In person. Where you live?
New Jersey, Princeton.
Oh, that's
right?
far
Princeton.
away. All right.
Yeah.
And Brandon Cheng is in California?
It's in LA, yes.
Ah, missed.
I do love New York though. So
Hey, move over here. Yeah. If we move, we can meet up.
I would. It is nastily hot. It is, I cannot go outside. It's like 105 right now. So,
are you melting?
I am melting, even with the AC, which the bill is going up and up. So, the summer program, I spent a good 2 weeks in New York City. So,
okay.
Yeah, but for anyone else, Edward, if you want to send me some information, maybe I can send to some of my friends at school.
Very good.
And yeah, if I have time on Saturday, because I was gonna go, but I had art class. I have no time on Saturday, I'll stop by just to say hi.
Sure. Say hello to Fern Rashcover.
Yeah.
Give her a big hug.
Yeah.
And show how successful you are. You're a young lady with leadership qualities. Very admirable. Yes.
Thank you. I think everyone's here is very admirable for.
Yes, thank you for hosting, Iris. I'm sorry. Thank you for cutting off. Thank you so much for hosting.
Right. So, Brian, if you'd like to do the honors of concluding our first AOH seminar.
We're skipping the discussion period?
I do not think that we have much time, but if
Okay. All right. Well, it was great meeting all of you. Thank you to everyone who took the time out of their day to attend and talk to us and other aspiring leaders. Have a great weekend, everyone.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, everybody.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Everybody.
Thank you.